So Conor McGregor came out with his big announcement after the first of the year. You know, we were all sort of waiting. He said New Year's Day is the day that you're going to find out who my next opponent is and where that fight's going to take place. Now, a lot of us were thinking UFC 300 as well as Michael Chandler being the opponent. We were right on the opponent front, but UFC 300 is not going to be the date. Conor said it's actually going to be International Fight Week at the end of June. So a little bit longer than we had thought, which is probably a good thing for Conor. He's going to have a little bit more time to prepare. He seems to have been sort of in vacay mode for the last little bit, so it'll give him 6 full months to prepare for what is a very tough opponent. But what I want to really talk about today and get your opinion on is, one, what is your take on the announcement? Is it what you were expecting? And then 2, are you bullish that this is the truth? Do you think this is actually going to be the fight and the opponent when Conor steps back into the cage, or will things change before then?
Well, you got to give credit to the master Conor McGregor himself, and he is the best troll that the UFC's ever had. And, you know, there's all sorts of reasons as to why this announcement came out when it came out. You know, the USADA deal with the UFC is officially over, and even though the UFC hasn't said that this fight's official, there's no contracts that have gone out. Of course, Michael Chandler will take the fight if Conor McGregor wants it. And Conor's done enough for the sport and for the UFC to get the fights that he wants. He's not asking for a title fight. He's not asking for title implications or anything like that. He's talking about Michael Chandler at 185. He's always doing interesting things to get the fans going crazy. And doing it on basically the day the USADA deal ended kind of gave some more wrinkles into the entire spectacle that was this fight announcement. People had an idea he was going to come out with something creative, and I love that he didn't do some sort of blockbuster Hollywood film. It was like him. He probably had his wife film it. He gave her the phone and
glass of wine.
Yeah, the Dr. Evil laugh, like swirling his drink. All of it was great, and it really did take the MMA world by storm. And everybody was interested. Like, okay, so we've got most of our who, what, where, when, and why that we need in a fight. We had an idea it was Michael Chandler, and I think Michael Chandler is the rightful guy to get the fight. Now, on your second point, does he deserve it or not? Or will he get it? I'm not 100% sold, but I'm leaning towards yes, and I'll give you my point for that. Michael Chandler is still in the top 5 rankings of 155. And even if he does slip out of it because, you know, he hasn't been as active as some of the other guys, he's still a top 5 draw at 155. He's still a meaningful character at 155 for title implications. And I think Conor still sees that as a great way to put himself right back into title contendership at 155. And that's why I'm kind of leaning towards Michael getting this fight. But also, Conor McGregor is the kind of guy that needs some certain things to come out of his opponents in order to get excited for him. He needs you to be entertaining. He needs you to be able to promote with him. He does a lot of the heavy lifting, but it always helps when you've got somebody to bounce your insults and bounce your creativity off of. And Michael Chandler's going to do it. And obviously, Michael Chandler's going to look a little bit like a punching bag in some of these scenarios. You know, you go up on a press conference, and I'm sure he'll have a few lines ready for Conor, but Conor's he's magic with the mic.
Yep.
And I really do think that, you know, Conor McGregor has looked at Michael Chandler's short career in the UFC and said, you know what? He hasn't been here for a long time, but he's done a great job with the short time he's been here. He's really entertaining for the fighters. He's really entertaining for the fans. The UFC loves him, and I think I can get an edge on this guy by getting him to come out here and stand and bang with me. Give the fans exactly what they want to see. 2 very electric, very explosive strikers, striking and not really worrying about weight cuts or anything like that. We don't need to see them depleting themselves, cutting 40, 50 pounds. Let's see these guys at 185. It'll be a bit of a spectacle. They'll both look like $1 million. And I think that's the reason Conor's kind of intrigued with the Michael Chandler fight. And that's also why Michael Chandler's been holding out for so long. He could have been doing all sorts of fights and bouncing in and out of the rankings at the top 10 of 155. But it was smart for him to hold out for this. And I think because he held out and he's done so many great things in the short time he's been in the UFC, that ought to get him the UFC's fight with Conor McGregor.
Yeah, well, so I think, you know, my answer as far as whether I believe this fight's going to happen is, I think it's 75-25. 75% that it's going to happen, 25% that it's not. And the reason I say there's that big of a chance that it's not going to materialize is because there is a lot of time between now and then.
Right.
6 months' time. Things change very fast in the UFC. We saw immediately after that announcement, Jorge Masvidal tweeted, "I'm unretired."
Right.
So as much as I love Michael Chandler, McGregor versus Masvidal is a bigger fight than McGregor versus Chandler.
Agreed.
And you know, that could potentially be top 2, top 3 biggest pay-per-views of all time.
Yeah.
I don't think it would eclipse the Conor Khabib. That one's going to be that will take a very special night to eclipse.
Right.
But the reason I'm so heavy on the 75% is when you say the who, what, where, when, and why, we know who, we know where, and all of that stuff, but the why comes into play. Why is a very simple answer, and time has shown over the years that the coaches of the Ultimate Fighter fight each other. Mm-hmm. Now, it's not always the case. There's been times where they've broken tradition. There's even been times where Conor McGregor broke tradition when, Uriah Faber was the coach.
Right.
So, but this one makes sense that these two would be coaches and then later square off. And the other is exactly what you said, that even though the fight is 100% not going to be contested at 155, I'm not sold that it's going to be contested at 185 either. I think maybe 170 is more likely the weight class that this fight will take place in. Yeah. And even though it's not happening at lightweight, Michael Chandler, as you said, is a meaningful name, not just as far as recognition is concerned, but meaningful in the rankings at 155.
Right.
So a win over him with the type of clout and recognition that Conor has will likely get him back into that contention. And one fight that could eclipse the Conor versus Khabib fight would be none other than Conor versus Khabib's best friend and his pupil, Islam Makhachev. Now,
Right.
We're a long way from that happening, but a step in that direction would be for Conor to knock off a guy who's meaningful at 155 in the top 5, which would be Michael Chandler. So we'll see what happens, and I think Michael Chandler, as you said, is going to give Conor the fight he wants. He's going to stand and bang. He's one of those guys, he could wrestle if he wants to, but he's not going to. He's going to bite down on his mouthpiece. He's going to entertain the crowd. He knows exactly why he's being paid the big bucks to fill the blue corner in this fight scenario, and he's going to show up and deliver exactly that. So I'm thinking 75-25. Not sure why it's happening on International Fight Week. I would have liked to see it happen sooner in April, and I think Conor in his video candidly said he would have also liked that, but they weren't able to hammer out the kinks. But I think all in all, it will likely happen.
Yeah, well, we've had such a long layoff for Conor anyways that what's a few extra months
Right.
getting thrown? And, realistically, the UFC only gets to put on so many major events per year, and Conor McGregor, unfortunately, has to be at the top of the bill for a pay-per-view card. That's kind of just the way the business model works. They can't afford to put him anywhere else, and he's got to be in 5-round fights. He's got to be in meaningful fights, and that's why this one really does seem like, okay, International Fight Week's far enough away. We don't have anything booked for it yet. We're not going to screw over any of our champions. There's rumors about 300 where Bilal and Leon are going to be on it, and I'm sure they'll throw another couple of title defenses on there, and it would just feel weird and like they're sliding 6 title fighters to put Conor McGregor on the top with Michael Chandler. So I can see the UFC just kind of trying to be like Switzerland in that situation. They're not really trying to ruffle feathers. But Conor McGregor, Michael Chandler, you can build a pay-per-view around that, no problem. And Michael Chandler's the right guy. He deserves this fight. And I think that Michael Chandler needs to realize that he just won the lottery getting signed to fight Conor McGregor. Or, basically,
The red panty night is a real thing.
it's a very real thing. And the one thing you can do once you do get that fight signed, or once you basically have that fight in your reach, is you have to do everything in your power inside and outside of the octagon, on the promotional side, on the social media, everything. And then, of course, give the fighters and the fans what they want to see. But you got to make sure you can show up for work again later on. And the only thing better than fighting Conor McGregor one time in your career is fighting him again in a rematch or in a trilogy. Everybody knows Conor McGregor likes to not settle his scores, but he likes to go back and rehash what's right or what's wrong. And if he loses to Michael Chandler, then all of a sudden he's going to want to get back in there with him. So Michael Chandler has to give Conor and the fans what they want to see, which is a stand-up fight between two electric strikers. But at the same time, he's got to go out there and knock him out if he wants to try to get another Conor McGregor fight. If not, then he's likely just going to be one of Conor's victims that gets beat and then has to go to the back of the line. He'll never get that fight again. But if you're Michael Chandler, your number one job right now is doing everything that you can to appease Conor McGregor, to make this fight happen, to get him excited about it, and then to guarantee him basically that you're not going to go down there and try to hold him up against the cage. You're not going to go down there just to say, I beat Conor McGregor. Because at the end of the day, records don't really matter. And at the end of the day, if you're in a fight that's bigger than every single title fight the UFC can put on television that they could possibly create, you've won. And it doesn't really matter what your record is. It doesn't really matter the results of the fight when you fight Conor McGregor, as long as you get to go in there. But one thing's for sure, if you go in there and make it a snooze fest, if you bore the fans, if you don't entertain with the number one entertainer in the sport in Conor McGregor, then you're not going to get invited back to that party. And that's why I think Michael Chandler's the right guy. He understands the call. He understands the job, the position that he's in. And I think he's going to do the right thing. He's going to move forward with this and get very entertaining with Conor, know how to play the boundaries and do everything right. And, man, 300 will be here before we know it. And I think this card's going to be really special. But I do actually think these two will headline it.
Yep, I agree.